The transport shuttle descended through Kepler 442b's atmosphere, cutting through purple-tinged clouds that swirled around the military installation. Below, Cadet Sarah Chun pressed her face against the viewport, watching the massive training complex grow larger with each passing second. Geometric buildings sprawled across the landscape like a metallic city, but her eyes fixed on the dark forest zone that bordered the eastern sector. That wilderness area looked untouched and primitive compared to the gleaming structures around it. "First time on a Coalition training world?" asked the Voss pilot, his scaled head turning slightly to observe his passenger. "First time off Earth." "Actually," Sarah admitted, pulling her duffel bag closer. The weight of what she was about to do settled on her shoulders like heavy armor. She was the first human to attend the Jather Military Academy, the first of her species to train with the Coalition's most elite forces. The shuttle touched down with barely a tremor. Sarah grabbed her gear and stepped onto the landing pad, immediately noticing how the gravity felt slightly heavier than home around her. Cadets of various species moved with purpose, insectoid Zothar clicking their mandibles in conversation, towering Kryn with their thermal-sensitive skin, Swift Voss, whose movements seemed almost liquid, Cadet Chun. A sharp voice cut through the bustle. Commander Thaxel approached, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming obsidian black in the double sunlight. His compound eyes studied her with what Sarah interpreted as skepticism. "You are surprisingly small for a human." "I meet all the physical requirements, sir," Sarah replied, straightening her posture. "We shall see." Thaxel gestured with one of his forearms. "Follow me. Your orientation begins immediately." The commander led her through the academy grounds, explaining protocols and pointing out facilities. Sarah absorbed everything, noting how the architecture favored species with exoskeletons or scales, lots of hard surfaces, minimal cushioning, temperature controls that ran cooler than human comfort zones. They reached a large amphitheater where other cadets were assembling. Sarah counted at least 30 species represented, but she was the only human heads turned as she entered. Conversations paused. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes, compound, thermal, and otherwise evaluating her. "Take your position," Thaxel commanded, pointing to an empty space in the third row. A holographic display materialized at the center of the amphitheater. Showing a dense forest environment, the image rotated slowly, revealing terrain features, elevation changes, and thick vegetation. "Cadets," Thaxel's voice boomed through the space. "You stand before the proving ground, our most honored test of individual capability. For 6 centuries, this exercise has separated the exceptional from the merely adequate." The hologram zoomed into specific locations, highlighting what appeared to be defensive positions and patrol routes. "The scenario is simple," Thaxel continued, his mandibles clicking with what might have been pride or amusement. One cadet enters the forest zone armed with only a survival knife and basic comm unit. Your objective: survive and evade a full hunter-killer squad for 20 standard minutes. Murmurs rippled through the assembled cadets. Sarah leaned forward, studying the terrain more carefully. The hunter squad consists of 6 experienced Zothar warriors equipped with full sensor arrays, communication networks, and non-lethal capture weapons. They know the terrain intimately. They have compound vision that detects movement in near darkness. They possess chemical sensors that can track your biological signature. A Kryn cadet raised one massive arm. "What is the success rate, Commander?" Thaxel's mandibles spread in what Sarah had learned was the Zothar equivalent of a cold smile. 3% in 40 years. Only 7 cadets have survived the full duration. The average survival time is 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Sarah did the math quickly. That meant hundreds of attempts, hundreds of failures. She glanced around at her fellow cadets and saw expressions ranging from determination to anxiety. For mammals, Thaxil's compound eyes seemed to focus directly on Sarah. The success rate is effectively 0. Your inferior sensory capabilities, your reliance on binocular vision, your thermal signatures that bloom like beacons to our sensors. These make you particularly vulnerable. Several cadets glanced in Sarah's direction. She kept her face neutral, but internally her mind was already racing through possibilities. Each of you will face the proving ground in turn, Thaxil announced. Preparation time is 4 standard hours. You may study terrain maps and request basic equipment from the approved list. No advanced technology beyond your knife and comm unit will be permitted in the zone. The hologram shifted, showing recordings of previous attempts. Sarah watched as cadets of various species tried different strategies. A Voss cadet attempted to outrun the hunters using superior speed captured in 6 minutes. A Kryn tried to hide using thermal camouflage found in 3 minutes. A Zother cadet used chemical markers to confuse the tracking lasted 9 minutes before being cornered. Every strategy focused on the same basic approaches: hiding, running, or attempting to use the cadets' natural advantages against the hunters. Every strategy failed. The exercise is designed to be impossible, whispered a reptilian Sorth cadet sitting near Sarah. They want to see how we handle inevitable defeat. But Sarah wasn't watching the failures anymore. She was studying the terrain, the vegetation, the topology. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory from countless hunting trips in the Oregon wilderness. Nature provides everything you need. Sarah, you just gotta know how to use it. The other cadets saw obstacles and hiding spots. Sarah saw something different entirely. She saw fallen deadwood that could become lever arms. She saw natural choke points where movement would be constrained. She saw slope angles that could be used to multiply force. She saw dense undergrowth that could conceal not a person, but a mechanism. Your assignments begin tomorrow, Thaxil concluded. Study the terrain, prepare your bodies. Accept that failure is the most likely outcome and learn from it. The briefing ended and cadets dispersed, most heading toward the recreation areas or study halls. Sarah made her way to the terrain database, requesting detailed topographical maps of the forest zone. A Zother instructor named Kreth approached her station. You are the human, Kreth observed, his voice more curious than dismissive. I am assigned as your mentor during training. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied. Continuing to study the maps, she zoomed in on areas with heavy fallen timber. You are looking at debris fields? Kreth's antennae twitched. Those areas provide poor concealment. Too much noise when moving. Too many sight lines. I'm not planning to hide, Sarah said quietly. Kreth's mandibles clicked in confusion. Then you plan to run? Human endurance is notable, but the hunters are faster over short distances. I'm not planning to run either. Then, Kreth paused, studying the human with his compound eyes. What is your strategy? Sarah looked up from the display, meeting the alien's gaze. Commander Thaxil said no advanced technology is allowed, but he never said anything about primitive technology. Kreth's confusion was evident in the way his antennae flattened against his head. Primitive technology is ineffective against modern sensors and tactics. Maybe, Sarah acknowledged. Turning back to the maps? Or maybe your sensors are so advanced they've created a blind spot. Can your chemical trackers detect wood? Can your motion sensors distinguish between a falling branch and a trap? Can your threat assessment systems recognize danger that doesn't have an energy signature? For a long moment, Kreth said nothing. Then his mandibles clicked rapidly. The Zother expression of deep thought. You propose to use the environment as a weapon, he said slowly. Where I come from, we've been doing that for thousands of years, Sarah replied. We called it survival. She highlighted several locations on the map, marking them with notation codes. Kreth watched as a pattern emerged, not escape routes, but a network of positions and zones. This is unusual, Kreth admitted. No cadet has approached the exercise this way. Good, Sarah said, her mind already designing mechanisms and traps. Then they won't know what's coming. Sarah stood at the edge of the forest zone as the first rays of dawn painted the sky in shades of amber and violet. She had requested her preparation time begin at first light, an unusual choice that had raised eyebrows among the observation staff. Most cadets use their 4 hours to rest, meditate, or review tactical approaches in climate-controlled comfort. Kreth accompanied her to the entry point, his compound eyes studying her simple loadout. Standard issue survival knife, COMM unit clipped to her belt, water container, and nothing else. You are certain you do not want thermal blankets? Kreth asked, or scent masking spray from the approved equipment list. Those work against sensors, Sarah replied, studying the tree line. I need my scent out there. I want them to track me. Kreth's antennae twitched in confusion, but he had learned over the past day that the human thought in patterns unfamiliar to coalition doctrine. She had spent the entire previous evening studying not tactical manuals, but rather historical databases about primitive human warfare. The searches had been unusual enough to flag the Academy's automated systems, deadfall traps, snare construction, tiger pits, punji stakes. The Oversight Committee questioned your research topics. Kreth had mentioned during their evening session Sarah had looked up from a particularly detailed article about medieval siege traps. Tell them I'm studying human history. That's not against regulations. Is it? No, Kreth admitted. But the connection to the exercise is unclear. It'll be clear enough, Sarah had promised. Now, standing at the forest edge, she turned to Kreth one final time. When do the hunters enter? 4 hours from now. Precisely at mid-morning, Kreth confirmed. You have that time to establish yourself in the zone. Perfect. Sarah adjusted her knife harness and stepped into the forest. The transition from cleared ground to wilderness was immediate. Dense undergrowth grabbed at her boots, and the canopy above filtered the double sunlight into emerald shadows. Sarah paused, letting her eyes adjust, listening to the sounds around her. Insect analogues buzzed in the branches. Something small skittered through leaves. Wind rustled through the alien trees, but Sarah wasn't listening for danger. She was listening to the forest itself. Understanding its rhythms, she moved deeper, following a game trail that showed signs of regular use by local fauna. After 20 minutes of careful progress, she reached the first location she had marked on her mental map, a hillside where recent storms had brought down several large trees. The fallen timber lay scattered like massive pickup sticks, some trunks as thick as her torso. Sarah examined them carefully, testing their weight, checking for rot. She found what she needed, a log roughly 3 meters long, solid enough to hold mass, but light enough for her to maneuver with leverage using her knife. She began cutting away smaller branches, stripping them clean. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. This was work she had done countless times in Oregon's forests, helping her grandfather maintain trails and clear hazards. Each branch became a component, each piece of vine a connecting element. Sarah checked her chronometer. 3 hours and 20 minutes remained. She worked faster by the time 2 hours had passed. Sarah had constructed her first mechanism, a balanced deadfall using a heavy log suspended between 2 trees, held in tension by a carefully arranged tripwire made from woven vine. The trigger was nearly invisible against the forest floor, positioned exactly where someone following her scent trail would step. But she didn't stop there. Sarah moved to her second location, a natural ravine with steep sides. Fallen branches clogged the bottom, creating what appeared to be difficult but navigable terrain. She climbed down and began rearranging the debris. What looked like random piles of wood became carefully balanced structures that would collapse under weight, creating noise and confusion. Her grandfather's lessons echoed in her mind. A trap ain't just about catching something, Sarah. Sometimes it's about making them think twice, making them slow down, making them scared of what they can't see. Third, location. A clearing with soft ground. Sarah used her knife to dig shallow pits, each one just deep enough to catch a foot, lined with sharp sticks that wouldn't seriously injure, but would definitely hurt and surprise. She covered them with leaves and debris, matching the surrounding forest floor perfectly. Fourth location. A dense thicket where multiple game trails converged. Here Sarah created her noise. Traps precariously balanced stacks of dry branches that would cascade down with loud crashes if disturbed. She positioned them to follow movement into specific paths. Paths she marked mentally, but left otherwise unmodified. 1 hour remained. Sarah's hands were scratched and dirty, her uniform covered in bark, dust, and leaf fragments. She moved to her fifth location, a massive fallen tree that created a natural shelter. This would be her bait. The obvious hiding spot that screamed inexperienced cadet. Around this location, she built her most elaborate trap network, tripwires at ankle and chest height, positioned to be barely visible in the filtered light. A counterweight system using a bent sapling that would whip forward if released. A carefully weakened section of dead tree that would collapse if leaned against. Sarah worked until her chronometer showed 15 minutes before the hunters would enter. Then she did something that would have horrified any coalition tactician. She began covering herself in mud. She scooped handfuls of wet earth from a stream bank and smeared it across her exposed sick skin, working it into her hair, coating her uniform. The cold mud made her shiver, but she knew it would mask her thermal signature and confuse chemical sensors. This was low-tech camouflage older than civilization itself. 10 minutes, Sarah moved to her primary position, not at the end of her trap network, but in its center. She had chosen a cluster of 3 trees whose trunks grew close together, creating a natural hide at ground level. Thick ferns provided additional concealment. From here, she could observe 3 different trap zones and the approaches between them. She settled into position, slowing her breathing, becoming part of the landscape. 5 minutes. Sarah ran through her mental map one final time. She knew every trap location, every safe path, every line of sight. More importantly, she knew what her traps were designed to do. Not capture the hunters, but control them, slow them, funnel them, make them predictable. Her grandfather's voice. Hunt the hunter, Sarah. Make them dance to your tune. The comm unit on her belt crackled to life. Commander Thaxil's voice emerged, formal and crisp. Exercise. Commencement in 60 seconds. Hunter squad is entering the zone from the western approach. Cadet Chen. Acknowledge. Sarah pressed the transmit button. Acknowledged. Sir. Ready. Your survival time begins now. The forest around Sarah suddenly felt different. Before, it had been neutral, almost welcoming. Now it was an arena, and somewhere in that arena, 6 elite Zother warriors were beginning their hunt. Sarah remained perfectly still. She had walked a clear path from the entry point to her bait shelter, leaving obvious signs: broken branches at human height, disturbed ground, her scent fresh on leaves and bark. She wanted them to follow, wanted them to think she was running scared. Minutes passed. Sarah controlled her breathing, listening. Then she heard it, the faint clicking of Zother mandibles communicating in subsonic ranges. They were close, maybe 50 meters away, following her trail exactly as planned, through the ferns. Sarah caught her first glimpse of the hunters. 6 Zother warriors moved in tactical formation, their exoskeletons painted in mottled patterns that blended with the forest. They carried non-lethal capture weapons and sensor equipment that glowed. With soft blue indicators, squad leader Vexstar was in front, one arm holding a chemical tracker that pulsed steadily. Sarah recognized him from the academy roster. 40 years of experience, decorated veteran, undefeated record in training exercises. Trail is fresh. Vexstar's voice carried clearly. Subject moved rapidly, showing signs of panic, poor fieldcraft. Obvious tracks. Sarah allowed herself a tiny smile. They saw exactly what she wanted them to see. The hunters advanced confidently, moving along the path Sarah had marked. They were 30 meters from her. First trapped, 20 meters. 15. Sarah's muscles tensed. Ready 10 meters. The lead scout's foot caught the tripwire. The sound of the deadfall releasing was like a gunshot in the quiet forest. A confident, sharp crack of breaking wood followed by the massive log swinging down in a vicious arc. The scout saw it at the last instant and threw himself sideways. But the log caught his sensor pack and weapon arm, sending both flying. The hunter squad froze, weapons raised, scanning for threats, but there was nothing to scan. No energy signature, no electronic device, no heat bloom, just wood and vine and physics. What? Vextar's voice held genuine confusion. Report. What hit you? I don't know, sir, the scout replied, recovering his weapon. Something mechanical? But there's no power source. Vextar approached the trap carefully, studying the mechanism. Sarah could see his compound eyes tracking the vine. The counterweight, the trigger system, primitive construction. He said slowly, made from organic materials. Does the human have engineering tools? Another hunter asked. Negative, standard loadout only. Vextar's mandibles clicked rapidly. She built this with her knife. The squad exchanged glances. This was not part of any scenario they had trained for. The hunter squad moved like insects, threading through a web they suddenly realized might be sticky. Every shadow became suspicious. Every fallen branch a potential threat. Vextar held up one armored hand, signaling a halt. Sensors? He demanded. Chemical trail continues toward the clearing ahead, reported the tracker. But sir, I'm detecting no technology signatures anywhere in this sector. Whatever that trap was. It's completely organic. Impossible, another hunter muttered. Traps require triggers. Sensors, activation mechanisms. Clearly not, Vextar replied, studying the surrounding forest with new wariness. His compound eyes could see in spectrums humans couldn't. Could detect minute movements. Could process visual data from hundreds of angles simultaneously. But none of that helped when the threat was simply wood and physics. Sarah watched from her concealed position as the squad conferred. 10 minutes had elapsed. She needed to keep them moving. Keep them uncertain. The hunters resumed their advance. Weapons raised, moving in a tighter formation now. They were approaching her second trap cluster. The ravine with the balanced branch pile. Sarah remained perfectly still as they reached the edge of the steep-sided channel. She could see Vextar examining the terrain, calculating approach vectors. The trail descends into the ravine. The tracker reported. Visibility is poor down there, another hunter observed. Multiple concealment positions. Vextar's mandibles clicked in a pattern. Sarah was beginning to recognize as tactical consideration. We go around. Flank positions on both sides, converge at the far end. Smart, Sarah thought, not taking the obvious path, but that was fine. She had planned for smart. The squad split into 2 groups of 3, each team moving along opposite rims of the ravine. They maintained sight lines with each other, communicating through hand signals and subsonic clicking. The left team moved carefully through dense undergrowth, following the ravine's edge. They were 5 meters from Sarah's noise trap when the point hunter's foot came down on a carefully positioned branch. The dry wood snapped with a sharp crack instantly. The balanced pile of deadwood Sarah had constructed collapsed in a cascading avalanche of sound. Branches tumbled and crashed, rolling down into the ravine with thunderous echoes. The hunter squad dropped into combat stances, weapons trained on the noise source. But again, nothing. No attacker. No threat. Just falling wood. False alarm. the left team leader reported. But his voice carried uncertainty. Vexstar's frustration was evident in the harsh clicking of his mandibles. Continue advance. 12 minutes elapsed. Both teams reached the far end of the ravine and paused to regroup. Sarah could see the tension in their movements now. The supreme confidence they had entered with was eroding, replaced by hypervigilance and doubt. This is wrong, one hunter said. The subject should be running, hiding. Instead, she's what? Building traps? Humans are primitive, another replied. Maybe this is their instinct when cornered. Quiet, Vexstar snapped. He consulted his tracker again. Chemical signature leads toward the large fallen tree ahead. Visual contact likely within the next 100 meters. The squad advanced towards Sarah's bait shelter. She watched them approach the clearing, where the massive log lay across the ground like a fallen giant. It was the perfect hiding spot hollowed out beneath, multiple exit routes. Good sightlines, exactly the kind of place an inexperienced cadet would. Sarah's muscles were cramped from remaining motionless for so long. The mud coating her skin had dried and cracked, pulling at her hair, but she didn't move, didn't shift position. 15 minutes had passed, 5 minutes to go. The hunters surrounded the fallen tree. Weapons ready. Vexstar signaled a synchronized approach from 3 sides. On my mark, he said. 3, 2, 1 now. They converged on the shelter. Weapons aimed into every opening. Empty, nothing but disturbed leaves where someone had clearly rested. She was here. The tracker confirmed. Recent, very recent. That was when the tripwire trap activated. One of the hunters had stepped backward, catching a vine Sarah had positioned at chest height. The bent sapling she had used as a counterweight released with vicious force, whipping forward. Its branches were tipped with sap and leaves, nothing sharp. But the impact still struck the hunter's sensor pack with enough force to send him stumbling. Before the squad could react, 2 more hunters triggered ground-level wires. The weakened section of dead tree Sarah had prepared collapsed inward with a groan of splintering wood. One hunter dove clear. Another got his leg caught temporarily in the debris. Multiple traps. Someone shouted, "Network traps." Vexstar's voice cut through the chaos. Hold positions. Defensive formation. But defensive formation meant staying still. And staying still meant burning time. Sarah allowed herself a small movement. She reached down slowly, picked up a fist-sized stone she had positioned earlier, and threw it hard to her left. The stone crashed through undergrowth 30 meters away, making exactly the kind of noise a running person would make. Movement left flank. A hunter called out, "No visual confirmation." Another reported, "Chemical sensors show concentration here, not there," the tracker said. Confusion clear in his voice. 17 minutes, 3 to go. Vexstar made a decision. "We're being played. She's not running, she's hurting us. Squad, mark your positions and call out trap locations as you find them. We map this network and find the gaps." Sarah's respect for the squad leader increased. He had identified her strategy, but identifying it and countering it in the remaining time were different things. The hunters began carefully examining their immediate area, marking tripwires and pit traps with small beacons. It was methodical and professional. It was also time-consuming. 18 minutes to go. Sarah knew she couldn't stay in her hide position much longer. They would eventually expand their search pattern to include her location. Time to move. She had planned for this. Between her position and the nearest hunter was a 60-meter corridor of forest she had deliberately left trap-free. Her safe path while they were busy examining the trap network. She could slip away. Sarah moved for the first time in 18 minutes. Every muscle protested. Cramped from stillness, she crawled backward from her hide, moving with glacial slowness, testing each hand and foot placement before committing weight. 5 meters, 10 meters, 15, she was behind a thick cluster of ferns when she heard Vextar's voice. Chemical sensors. I'm getting a fresh signature. Moving. Bearing. Sarah abandoned stealth for speed. She sprinted through the forest, using her knowledge of the safe corridors to move at full speed while the hunters had to navigate carefully around their now-discovered trap network behind her. She heard the squad mobilizing. Visual. I have visual on the subject. In pursuit. But pursuit meant following, and following meant moving through terrain they now knew was hostile. 19 minutes. 1 minute remaining. Sarah ran along a game trail, her breath burning in her lungs. She could hear the hunters behind her, crashing through undergrowth. They were faster in open terrain, their exoskeletons giving them strength and speed. But this wasn't open terrain. Sarah veered right, deliberately running toward her final trap cluster, the area around a thick copse of twisted trees where she had built overlapping layers of tripwires and pit traps. She knew the safe path through one narrow corridor, marked in her mind by specific trees and ground features. She took it at full speed, her feet finding purchase on solid ground, while everything around her was undermined. The hunters followed. 30 seconds. The lead hunter entered the trap cluster. His foot plunged through camouflage leaves into a shallow pit. He stumbled, but caught himself on a tree trunk with a tripwire, the counterweight released, and a shower of dead branches Sarah had suspended above crashed down. Not dangerous, but completely disorienting. 2 more hunters piled up behind the first, their momentum carrying them into overlapping trigger zones. Vextar, bringing up the rear, saw what was happening and tried to halt. Too late. His foot caught a wire. 20 seconds. Sarah burst out of the trap cluster and dove behind a large boulder, pressing herself flat. 15 seconds behind her. The hunters were extracting themselves from the tangle of traps, shouting coordinates and clearances to each other. 10 seconds. Vextar's voice, frustrated and impressed. She's close, right in front of us. Final push. 5 seconds. The hunters charged forward, breaking through the last screen of vegetation. 3 seconds. They entered the small clearing where Sarah had taken cover. 2 seconds. Weapons raised, sensors sweeping. They triangulated on her position. 1 second. The klaxon sounded loud, harsh alarm that echoed through the forest from speakers mounted on distant towers. The official signal that 20 minutes had elapsed. The hunters froze, weapons still raised. Sarah stood up from behind the boulder, hands raised in a universal gesture of non-threat. She was covered in dried mud from head to toe, her uniform torn and dirty, scratches across her arms and face. But she was standing, and she was smiling. Vextar lowered his weapon slowly. His compound eyes studied the human with an expression that transcended species. Pure, undiluted respect. How? He asked simply. Sarah gestured at the forest around them. You brought sensors and weapons to a trap fight. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind in the alien trees, and the observation room had been designed for 30 occupants. Currently, it held nearly 200. Word had spread through the academy faster than neural signals. The human cadet had survived the proving ground. Within minutes of the exercise's conclusion, instructors, cadets, and even off-duty personnel had crowded into the space, filling every available surface to watch the debriefing. Sarah stood at the center of the amphitheater, still covered in dried mud and forest debris. She had refused the offer to clean up. First, Commander Thaxil had insisted the debriefing happen immediately while details were fresh around her. Holographic displays showed recordings from multiple angles, sensor feeds from the Hunter Squad, overhead surveillance drones, even ground-level cameras that had been hidden throughout the forest zone. The footage played on endless loops, showing Sarah's traps activating, the Hunter Squad's confusion, the final desperate chase. Thaxil stood on the raised platform, his forearms gesturing at the displays. In 6 centuries of this exercise, he began, his voice carrying through the absolute silence. We have seen every conventional approach: stealth, speed, evasion, even attempted negotiation. All follow predictable patterns. He paused, his compound eyes fixing on Sarah. This, he gestured at the screens showing Sarah constructing traps, is unprecedented. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah saw cadets of a dozen species leaning forward, studying the footage with intense concentration. Kreth moved to stand beside the commander. With permission, sir. I would like to present my analysis. Thaxil gestured agreement. Kreth activated a different holographic display. This one showing a timeline of the exercise with sensor data overlaid. The hunter squad entered the zone with full confidence. Their equipment represented the pinnacle of coalition tracking technology. Chemical sensors capable of detecting biological markers at parts per trillion. Motion detectors calibrated to pick up movements as small as 3 millimeters. Thermal imaging that can distinguish temperature variations of 0.1 degrees. He advanced the timeline to Sarah's first trap. But all these sensors share a common characteristic. They detect energy, emissions, or biological signatures. They are designed to find technology and living targets. Kreth's antennae twitched. They are not designed to recognize inert matter arranged in mechanical configurations. A voice from the crowd, a Kryn instructor. But traps require triggers. Activation systems. No. Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but clear. They don't. They require only potential energy and a release mechanism. A balanced weight will fall if disturbed. A bent sapling will spring back if released. These are not activated systems. They are constrained systems waiting to return to equilibrium. She walked to one of the holographic displays and pointed at the deadfall trap. This log weighed approximately 80 kilograms. I couldn't throw it or swing it with my own strength. But gravity doesn't care about my strength. Gravity is a constant force. I just had to position the log, constrain it, and then let physics do the work. Primitive warfare, someone muttered. Effective warfare. Vextar's voice rang out. The squad leader had cleaned up, and now wore his formal uniform. He pushed through the crowd to stand near Sarah. My team was defeated not by lack of skill or technology, but by overconfidence in that technology. He activated another display. This one showing the hunter squad's movement patterns. We entered assuming the subject would behave as all previous subjects had behaved. We expected running, hiding, possibly clever use of terrain for concealment. We did not expect the terrain itself to become hostile. Vextar's mandibles clicked in a pattern that Sarah now recognized as self-criticism. By the time we understood what was happening, we had lost initiative. Every step forward required caution. Every sound might be another trap. The human didn't need to outrun us. She just needed to slow us down. Commander Thaxil studied the timeline data. The chemical tracker showed Cadet Chun's position throughout the exercise. Why did you not simply bypass the trap network and go directly to her location? We tried, sir, another hunter responded. But every direct approach route was either trapped or led into trap clusters. She had created corridors of safe passage for herself and killing zones for anyone following. Voss tactical instructor spoke up. This is a defensive strategy, but the exercise requires survival and evasion. Not defeating the hunters. The best defense made survival possible, Sarah replied. If I had simply run, you would have caught me in 5 minutes. Your sensors would have tracked me. Your speed would have closed the distance. I couldn't outrun you or hide from you, but I could make you question every decision. Doubt every step. Waste time on caution. She pointed to the timeline. Look at the movement rates for the first 5 minutes. Your squad covered 200 meters. In the next 15 minutes, you covered less than 300 meters. I didn't need to stop you, just slow you down. Silence filled the observation room as the tactical implications settled over the assembled officers and cadets. A senior instructor, a four-armed Zother with silver markings that indicated advanced age and rank, stood up. Cadet Chun, you studied primitive human warfare techniques before the exercise. Yes, sir. These techniques are thousands of years old, correct? Some are older than recorded history, Sarah confirmed. My species has been building traps since before we had metal tools. The instructor's mandibles spread wide. And these techniques, are they common knowledge among humans? Sarah considered the question. The principles are, any human child who grows up in rural areas learns basics. We call it camping. Hunting, survival skills, building fires, reading tracks, setting snares. It's recreational for most of us now. But the knowledge persists. Recreational. The instructor repeated slowly. You learn warfare as recreation. We learn survival skills. Sarah corrected. But yes, I suppose the line between survival and warfare has always been thin for humans. Another murmur through the crowd. This one carrying a different tone, not skepticism, but something that might have been concern. Thaxo raised one arm for silence. The exercise committee must convene to discuss implications. Cadet Chun, you are dismissed to medical evaluation. Squad leader Vextar, prepare a full tactical analysis for review. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Kreth, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic displays. You have created a problem, he said quietly. Sir? The proving ground has been our standard for evaluating individual capability for 6 centuries. It was designed to be nearly impossible. To test psychological resilience in the face of inevitable failure. Kreth's antennae drooped slightly. Now it can be beaten. Other cadets will study your approach. Adapt your techniques. Isn't that good? Sarah asked, learning from success? Perhaps. Kreth's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Or perhaps you have revealed a critical weakness in coalition tactical doctrine. We have become so reliant on technology that we have forgotten the fundamentals. Sarah followed his gaze to the screens, where her traps were still playing on loop. Your species fought wars for millennia with nothing but sticks and stones. Kreth continued. You learned to read terrain not as backdrop, but as arsenal. You developed tactics not from textbooks, but from desperation and innovation. He looked back at Sarah. We built our military around sensor superiority and technological advantage. What happens when we face an enemy who has neither? You adapt, Sarah said simply. You learn. Yes. Kreth's tone was grave. We learn. But the question is whether we learn before or after we face such an enemy in actual combat. He walked away, leaving Sarah standing among the dispersing crowd. She noticed groups of cadets pointing at her, some with admiration, others with what looked like resentment. She had broken something that was supposed to remain unbroken. Vextar approached, his movements precise and formal. Cadet Chun, you can call me Sarah. His mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Sarah. Then, my team would like to walk your trap network tomorrow with you as guide. We wish to understand what we missed. I'd be honored, Sarah replied. But I should warn you, once you know how to see them, you'll start seeing them everywhere. That is precisely what concerns our commanders. Vextar admitted. You have taught us to fear the forest. More than that, you have taught us that our sensors have blind spots. These are uncomfortable lessons. The best lessons usually are, Sarah said. Vextar's compound eyes studied her for a long moment. Your species survived 10,000 years of warfare against itself before reaching the stars. You evolved not just intelligence, but cunning. Not just cooperation, but deception. Not just tools, but weapons. He paused. This is what makes humans formidable, yes? Sarah thought about her grandfather. teaching her to read deer trails and set rabbit snares. She thought about human history, painted in blood and innovation, survival and adaptation. We're not special because we're stronger or smarter, she said finally. We're just really, really good at not dying. Vextara's mandibles clicked in a pattern Sarah couldn't quite interpret. The galaxy, he said, is going to find humans very surprising. Sarah watched him walk away, then looked down at her mud-covered hands. Humans had spent millennia learning to kill each other with nothing but ingenuity and materials at hand. That dark. 3 months after Sarah's successful completion of the proving ground, the forest zone looked different, or rather, the cadets entering it looked at it differently. Sarah stood at the observation window, watching a Voss cadet prepare for his attempt. Unlike previous candidates who had marched in with weapons ready, this one carried an armload of flexible branches and was studying the terrain with calculating eyes. He will fail, Commander Thaxil said from behind her. He understands the concept but not the execution. Trap building requires not just knowledge but instinct. Thousands of hours of practice. He'll do better than he would have before, Sarah replied. That's what matters. The commander's mandibles clicked in agreement. The exercise completion rate has increased from 3% to 11%. In the past quarter, your influence spreads. Sarah watched the Voss cadet enter the forest zone, immediately beginning to gather materials. You could change the exercise, make it harder again. No. Thaxil's voice was firm. The exercise was never meant to be unbeatable. It was meant to test adaptability and innovation. You demonstrated. BOTH, others now follow your example. This is exactly as it should be. Notification chimed on Sarah's datapad. She glanced at it and felt her stomach tighten. The Coalition Command Review Board wants to meet with me. I know. Thaxil said. I am the one who requested it. Sarah turned to face him. Sir? The commander gestured for her to follow, leading her away from the observation window and into a private conference room. A holographic display activated, showing not the forest zone but star maps. Dozens of systems highlighted in amber and red. Coalition space. Thaxil began. Spans 417 settled worlds and approximately 943 outpost stations. We have maintained peace and security for 3 centuries through technological superiority. Our doctrine is built on sensor networks, orbital surveillance, automated defense systems. He zoomed the display into a cluster of red-marked systems. These are recent incidents: pirate attacks, resource raids, territorial incursions by unaligned factions. In each case, our forces responded with overwhelming technological advantage, and in each case, he paused significantly, we found evidence of low-technology countermeasures being employed against us. Sarah studied the incident report scrolling past. Sensor nets disrupted by simple chaff, communication arrays jammed by crude electromagnetic pulses, supply convoys ambushed using mechanical traps. Not unlike her own, someone's already doing what I did, she said slowly. Multiple someones, Thaxil confirmed. Scattered groups across frontier space who cannot match our technology, but who understand that technology has vulnerabilities. They use tactics we do not teach, weapons we do not recognize as weapons, strategies that do not appear in our databases. He brought up footage from one incident. A Coalition patrol stumbling into what looked like a primitive deadfall trap scaled up to vehicle size. This is concerning, Sarah admitted. This is why Coalition Command wishes to meet with you. Thaxil's compound eyes fixed on her. They want you to develop a training program, not just for cadets here at the Academy, but for active forces across Coalition space. You would teach them to recognize and counter low-technology threats. Sarah sank into a chair, processing the implications. You want me to teach an entire military force how to think like primitive humans? I want you to teach them how to survive against opponents who already think that way." Thaxil's tone was serious. "Your success in the proving ground was impressive, but the real value is not that you won. It is that you made us realize we had become predictable, overspecialized, vulnerable." The door chimed. Kreth entered, followed by Vexstar and 2 other Zsera officers Sarah didn't recognize. All wore formal military insignia. Cadet Chun, one of the strangers, began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I am Strategic Commander Velzar of the Coalition, Tactical Development Division. I have reviewed your exercise performance and subsequent analysis 17 times. Sir." Sarah stood at attention. "At ease, please." Velzar gestured for everyone to sit. "I am not here to critique. I am here to learn. Your approach to the proving ground exposed a critical gap in our military education. We have trained our forces to excel with advanced technology, but neglected the fundamentals that underlie all warfare." Another officer, this one with silver markings indicating medical specialization, spoke up. "I have been studying human evolutionary history. Your species spent approximately 2 million years as hunter-gatherers before developing agriculture. Another 12,000 years in tribal and civilization-level conflicts before achieving spaceflight. This is," she paused, searching for words, "an unusually long period of violent competition. Most coalition species achieve spaceflight within 5,000 to 7,000 years of developing tool use." Velzar added, "We did not have time to develop the depth of tactical innovation that humans possess." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the direction this was heading. "Are you saying humans are naturally better warriors?" "No," Kreth interjected. "We are saying humans are naturally better survivors. There is a difference. Warriors train for victory. Survivors learn adaptation." Velzar activated a new display, this one showing a proposed curriculum. "We want you to develop a 12-week intensive course in what we are calling environmental tactical systems, essentially teaching coalition forces to see their surroundings as potential resources rather than mere terrain." Sarah scanned the outline. It covered everything from basic trap construction to advanced camouflage techniques, from reading natural patterns to building improvised tools. "This is," she struggled for words, "this is asking me to teach centuries of human survival knowledge in 3 months. We are asking you to teach the fundamentals," Vexstar said. "The principles that allow someone to look at a fallen branch and see a weapon, to examine terrain and identify both advantages and vulnerabilities. Once the foundation is established, individuals can develop their own applications. Your proving ground performance was not replicable by most species," Velzar admitted. "The manual dexterity required, the spatial reasoning, the physical endurance, these are areas where humans excel. But the conceptual framework, the idea that simple solutions can defeat complex systems, that is universally applicable." Sarah looked around the room at these alien officers, these representatives of a civilization that spanned hundreds of worlds, and realized they were genuinely asking for her help. "I'm 23 years old," she said quietly. "I'm a cadet, not an instructor. I learned these skills from my grandfather, who learned them from his grandfather. It's generational knowledge, informal, passed down through practice and experience, which is precisely why we need you." The medical officer said, "Formal military doctrine is excellent for teaching established techniques, but innovation comes from informal knowledge, from practical experience, from the kind of learning that happens in forests and hunting grounds rather than classrooms." Thaxil leaned forward. "You would retain your cadet status. This would be considered part of your advanced training. You would teach while learning, sharing human perspective while absorbing coalition tactical doctrine, a mutual exchange." Sarah thought about her grandfather, about those long afternoons in Oregon forests. He had never framed it as military training, just skills every person should know. How to read weather, find water, build shelter, recognize danger. If I do this, she said carefully, I want it clear that I'm not teaching humans to be soldiers. I'm teaching survival skills that have military applications. There's a difference. Agreed, Velzar said immediately. The goal is not to militarize human culture, but to learn from it. Sarah stood and walked to the holographic display, studying the star map with its highlighted incidents. So many worlds, so many species, all learning to coexist, and now learning that coexistence sometimes meant understanding how others survived. I'll need assistance, she said. People from different species who can help translate concepts across different physiologies and perceptual frameworks. What works for human hands might not work for Zother manipulators or sensory organs. Granted. Velzar agreed, and I want to start small, maybe 30 students initially. See what works and what doesn't before expanding. Acceptable. And Sarah turned to face them. I want it explicitly stated that this knowledge is for defense, not aggression. I won't teach people how to be better killers, only how to be better survivors. Kreth's antennae twitched in approval. You sound like your grandfather would. Sarah smiled slightly. He always said the point of hunting wasn't to kill, it was to eat. The point of survival skills wasn't to fight, it was to live. If I'm going to teach coalition forces, that philosophy stays central. Then we are in agreement. Velzar stood, extending one arm in the Zother gesture of partnership. Sarah clasped it, feeling the cool smoothness of his exoskeleton. Over the following weeks, Sarah's world transformed. She went from being a curiosity, the human cadet who beat the impossible test, to being a resource. Coalition Command provided her with facilities, equipment, and access to experts in tactics, engineering, and cross-species physiology. Her first class consisted of 30 students, 10 Zother, 8 Kren, 7 Voss, and 5 members of species Sarah had barely encountered. They